Did you know? China exists. It's a country and it's located right here. But how did it get there? And why do many nations and peoples around the world today seem to simultaneously admire and fear it? Let's find out together. The history of China is as long as it is convoluted, so I'm going to do my best to break it down and focus on the major through points so as to construct a flowing, cohesive narrative. It started the same way all stories do, at the beginning. Humans have existed in present-day China since, well, humans have existed, really. The Zhou Peking man site housed one of the first specimens of Homo erectus, providing evidence for humans in the region potentially as long as 700,000 years ago. Fast forward quite a bit past centuries of late Neolithic cultures that we do not know a lot about, mainly because, like with almost all cultures of that same time period across the globe, what we know we can only learn from archaeological finds and inferences. Because we lack a written history from these peoples. Because there was no writing. Any and all ideas about anything could and were only passed verbally in the oral tradition. This is why the first period in Chinese history is known as the Mythical Period / Xia. The transition from prehistory to history in China is marked by a fascinating and blurry period told by Chinese legend often called the Mythical Period. In this time, it is said, ruled a succession of 5 legendary emperors called, drumroll, the 5 Emperors. Wow. They were Huangdi from 2698 to 2599 BCE, whose name translates to Yellow Emperor, a moniker he often goes by in English, founding ancestor of the Han Chinese ethnic group credited with the invention of ancient Chinese characters, silk, and Chinese medicine. Zhuanshu, 2513 to 2435 BCE, credited with the Chinese calendar and introduction of religion and astrology. Ku, 2412 to 2343 BCE, inventor of musical instruments and composer of songs. Yao, 2317 to 2234 BCE, said by Confucius to be an inspiration and model of virtue, righteousness, and unselfish devotion, particularly to future emperors. Shun, 2233 to 2205 BC, whom Confucius called a model of integrity and resplendent virtue. And his son Yu the Great, 2294 to 2197 BCE, tamer of floods who stopped the great and terrible flooding of the Yellow River, or Huanghe, the 6th longest river in the world, and one of China's 2 great rivers, the 2nd longest in the country. The Yellow River, or Huanghe, spans an incredible 5,464 kilometers. The largest in China is the Yangtze, the 3rd longest river in the world, spanning a staggering 6,300 kilometers. The story goes, Yu the Great stopped the flooding by opening up channels to lead water to other rivers and out to sea. He was said to have worked tirelessly alongside the people to build the channels, and in some legends, he used a dragon to assist in carving out the canals. After this great success, being the hero of the people and having their full support, Yu founded the Xia dynasty and instituted the practice of passing rulership to a son. This entire period is often seen as being a blend of myth and fact. Perhaps these people actually lived, but their legends far outgrew them, and their lives and accomplishments seem to have been embellished greatly. In fact, there is debate as to whether or not the Xia dynasty even existed. Do you remember what I said about the oral tradition? Think about it like this. Have you ever played a game of telephone? One person invents a message and whispers it to the next person. This message is then passed along the entire group until the original sender receives the message again. They then speak it aloud, and almost every time, the message has been modified in some way, often in a massive and holistically content-altering manner. Now, think about this message going through thousands and thousands of people over a multitude of generations. Do you think you're going to end up with the same message you began with? If this doesn't work in a group of 10 people and a time span of a couple minutes, you can almost guarantee the message will be wildly different at the end of these generational gaps. Not only that, but some people theorize that a later dynasty, the Zhou, invented stories about the Xia in order to support their own claim to rule. Perhaps we can go into more detail on this all in a future video. For now, let's move on and be satisfied that in the traditional history, the Xia is said to be the first dynasty, but modern archaeologists and historians prefer the first dynasty of which there is clear evidence, the Shang, 1600 to 1050 BCE. The Shang dynasty is said to have begun around 1600 BCE. The exact date and event that marks its founding is unknown. Some legends refer to a tribal chief named Tang defeating the Xia dynasty and establishing the Shang in its place. Tang, known as Tang of Shang, a name that can do no wrong, is said to have established the dynasty's first capital at a town called Shang, located near present-day Zhou. Though the political capital would be moved many times throughout the course of the Shang dynasty, the ancestral capital where the Shang kings held their most sacred temples, texts, and regalia never moved. Today, you can visit Inshu, the archaeological site where Yin, the final capital of the Shang dynasty, is located. The Shang dynasty seems to have been marked by frequent and heavy warring. As oracle bones, artifacts, and records show, Shang kings were constantly waging war with many peoples, near and far. Large armies were mobilized and sent out, and sometimes even larger droves of prisoners of war were captured and brought back. They usually served either as forced laborers or sacrifices in rituals. Speaking of oracle bones, religion played an important part in people's lives during the time of the Shang. People worshipped Shangdi, a god who ruled over pretty much everything. Sun, moon, victory in battle, harvest, fate of the capital, weather, and so on. And an early emergence of a common trend throughout Chinese cultural history all the way into modern times, people also worshipped their ancestors. Kings used oracle bones to communicate with ancestors and made many sacrifices to them. They believed that failure to appropriately worship ancestors would lead to the degradation and decline of their family and kingdom. This belief in ancestors living on and requiring worship led to the practice of creating vast and elaborate tombs for members of the Shang royal family. Of the Shang contributions to Chinese civilization, 3 are perhaps of greatest importance: the invention of writing, the development of a layered hierarchical government, and the usage and advancement of bronze technology, both in and out of warfare. Bronze weapons such as halberds, spears, bows, and chariots allowed the Shang to dominate militarily and is one of the main reasons the Shang stayed in power for so long. But alas, all things must come to an end. Sorry to all you die-hard Shang fans out there. Yeah, I see you. Armies from a nearby state located in the far western reaches of the Yellow River in the Shaanxi province invaded the capital and overthrew the Shang dynasty. This began the rule of the Zhou, 1050 to 221 BCE. The first period of Zhou rule was known as the Western Zhou, 1050 to 771 BCE, because its capital was located far to the west in Fengjing, modern-day Xi'an. Since it possessed a territory even larger than that of the Shang, Zhou kings created a system of feudalisms where regions would be ruled by appointed officials, either relatives or other noblemen. In order to legitimize their overthrow of the Shang and ability to rule, Zhou kings created the Mandate of Heaven, which stated that only one king who possesses heaven's favor can rule, and through this claimed to be divinely ordained. This is the same time period where some historians argue that the Zhou invented the Xia dynasty in order to further legitimize their ability to rule. Since they claimed the Shang dynasty had come to power by overthrowing the Xia, it is precedented and right that the Zhou should come to power by overthrowing the Shang. In general, culturally, the Zhou were not very different from the Shang. They held similar religious rituals and used extensive bronze working. Over time, their own more unique bronze designs, motifs, and shapes emerged in their art. Perhaps the most important cultural contributions from the Zhou was in its great philosophers. Confucius, circa 551 to circa 479 BCE, founded the school of Confucianism. Lao Tzu, circa 6th century BCE, founded Taoism, and Han Feizi, circa 280 to 233 BCE, founded legalism. Perhaps you've heard of these? These are all fascinating schools of thoughts that are too complex to really go into detail about here and now in this already incredibly long video, but I strongly encourage you to look more into them, or perhaps I'll cover them myself in the future. Generally, they were all concerned with the most important question of their time: how to create a stable and harmonious society. It's a question we probably should consider more as well nowadays. The Zhou kings found it difficult to maintain control over their large empire. The individual states grew more wealthy and powerful, and with this, independent. On top of this, in 771 BCE, nomadic raiders from the Central Asian steppe invaded and sacked the capital, killing the current ruler and forcing the Zhou to relocate to the east, marking the beginning of a period known as, you guessed it, the Eastern Zhou, 771 to 221 BCE. The Eastern Zhou was a turbulent period full of infighting and political turmoil. States were frequently warring with each other for land and/or political control. This reached its height in the Warring States period, 475 to 221 BCE, another very creatively named period. In this time, the many states consolidated into just 7. These battled for control until a single state emerged victorious: the Qing, 221 to 206 BCE. The Qin was a fascinating dynasty. Even though it lasted for a mere 15 years, it is, in a sense, one of the most important and influential dynasties in all of Chinese history. In order to properly understand this, let's back up slightly. In 246 BCE, back in the Warring States period of the Zhou dynasty, Zhou became the king of the state of Qin in northwest China at just age 13. 25 years later, through espionage, bribery, and the ruthless and skilled leadership of his generals, the final rival state was annexed in 221, marking the end of the Zhou and beginning of the Qin. In order to commemorate and celebrate this achievement, Zhou shed the title of king and assumed the title of emperor. Additionally, he proclaimed himself Qin Shi Huang, which literally translates as first emperor of Qin. Though the Qin dynasty would only have one other emperor, this title means a lot more when you place it in the broader context of Zhou being considered to be the first emperor of China. In fact, the English name China is derived from this dynasty's name, Qin. China. Man. Qin Shi Huang was the first to assume the title and organized his kingdom more formally as an empire. He abolished territorial feudal power in the empire and exercised control and consolidated power by forcing wealthy aristocrats and nobles and their families to live in his capital, Xianyang, and divided the rest of the nation into 36 military districts, with each headed by its own civil and military administrator. He also worked towards and issued orders for standardization of written language, laws, measures, weights, and more. Not only did he work to unify his empire in this manner, but effort was made towards physical and literal unification as well. To solidify infrastructure, a network of roads and canals was constructed, and in order to protect his people from northern barbarian invaders, something that we will see a lot of, fortresses were linked together to form a little something you may have heard of called the Great Wall. It would not be finished until nearly 2,000 years later in the 17th century CE, but its construction began here in the Qin dynasty. By the way, even in the time before humans first breached the atmosphere, it was commonly said that you could see the Great Wall from space due to its immense size. The wall is incredibly long, with estimates varying from 2,500 to 8,000 to a staggering 20,000 kilometers claimed by the Chinese government's cultural survey, so this may seem to initially make sense. In fact, many even claimed that it would be visible from the moon. When Apollo astronauts first visited the moon, this latter claim was officially debunked. But what about from space? The International Space Station, or ISS, orbits at an average altitude of 400 kilometers. While some astronauts, mainly Chinese nationals, have claimed to have spotted the immense object from their modules high above the Earth, the claim is still shaky at best, and what they are making out is little more than faintly discolored lines cutting into the mountains and forests. Even given all of this, is being able to spot this from space really all that impressive? Allow me to explain. Take an average two-way road in the United States, and most places in the world, but I will be using the official units from the US. The width of each lane is 3.6 meters, totaling up to 7.2 if you take a two-lane road, and we could very safely round that up to 8 meters to account for the shoulders and center lines. The Great Wall's width, on average, is about 4 to 5 meters. So the average road, and in fact quite a small road compared to highways and freeways, is much wider than the Great Wall, and its darkly colored asphalt would be expected to naturally contrast with the landscape even more than the light gray/brown of the wall. Given all of this, if the wall is indeed visible from space, so too would be the majority of roads on the planet. This is not to disparage the feat of the construction of the wall. People often mistake the wall's immensity in length as general immensity, though this, of course, makes little to no sense. Additionally, the wall does not look like this all the way through. Some sections are much smaller, comprised of forts, or are not even connected at all. Anyway, let's get back to it. The other incredibly famous creation that came out of the Qin dynasty is the Terracotta Army. In 1974, thousands of life-sized clay soldiers made of terracotta, in addition to other workers, retainers, and even animals, which all amount to form a microcosm of the empire to adorn the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, was discovered. But we've been stuck in the Qin for far too long. Qin Shi Huang instituted an authoritarian government to rule the vast empire as well as enforce his aforementioned standardization efforts. Additionally, to combat alternative and subversive thought, he ordered all books except for those on utilitarian subjects to be burned. Somebody say Fahrenheit 451? These reasons, combined with heavy taxes to support war efforts and the construction of roads and the Great Wall, led to high tensions, and after Qin Shi Huang's death in 210 BCE, rebellions erupted and led to the overthrow of the Qin dynasty in 207 BCE. After a brief transitional period, the Qin were replaced by the Han, 206 BCE to 220 CE. The Han Dynasty was founded by Liu Bang, circa 256 to 195 BCE, a man from humble beginnings who led the revolt against the oppression of the Qing dynasty. Upon becoming emperor, he took the name Gaozu and worked toward repairing the damage caused by the Qin through more benevolent laws and care for the common people. The Han solidified Chinese culture so thoroughly that the ethnic group that comprises the majority of the population of China and Taiwan is still referred to as Han Chinese to this day. Gaozu kept the Qin philosophy of legalism, albeit less severely, but it was later in this dynasty under Wu, or Wu Di, Wu the Great, ruled from 141 to 87 BCE, that Confucianism was established as the guiding basis for official, educational, and individual conduct. This led to a bureaucracy run by those highly educated in Confucian writings and other classics. In fact, this dynasty established the paradigm for all succeeding dynasties up until 1912 CE. Foreshadowing! Wu the Great also opened a little something called the Silk Road and established trade with the West. He negotiated a peace with the nomadic peoples of the North and West and promoted peace. Importantly, in stark contrast with the Qin, Wu the Great and the Han in general encouraged cultural development in the arts and sciences, as well as promoted literacy and the study of history. Cultural values of the Zhou that were discarded by the Qin were restored by the Han, particularly through their aforementioned core philosophies and schools of thought. Another very notable person from the Han Dynasty was the great historian Sima Qian, circa 145 to 87 BCE, who wrote Shiji, or Records of the Grand Historian, which set the standard and form for Chinese historical writings all the way up to nearly present-day times. Oh my god. Much of what we know and have discussed thus far comes from Sima Qian. He took the complex and convoluted history which preceded and distilled it into a logical and understandable account which made sense of the various conflicting accounts of the many different independent states with different ideas and agendas. Fast forward a bit to about 130 CE, hi Jesus, bye Jesus, the Han imperial court had become corrupt with the royal family holding less power than the palace eunuchs and generals. Then in 184 CE, the peasants revolted due to high taxes and famine in an event known as the Yellow Turban Rebellion, or Yellow Scarves Rebellion. I guess they just liked yellow headwear. The generals of the court put this rebellion down, but this great big mess weakened the dynasty, and afterward the country was divided among the major generals into 3 kingdoms, one of whom, Cao Cao, or Meng De, from 155 to 220 CE, took the emperor with him, moved the capital to Xuxian at present-day Xuchang, consolidated power, assumed the imperial prerogatives, and eventually the emperor ceded the throne to Cao Cao's son, Cao Pi. This ended the Han dynasty, began the Wei kingdom, and at the same time started the Three Kingdoms period, 220 to 280 CE. Note, these kingdoms can also be referred to as dynasties. The Wei kingdom, from 220 to circa 265 CE, ruled in the north, but 2 other Han generals also claimed themselves to be emperors and overtook regions in the west and south. The Shu Han kingdom, 221 to circa 263 CE, ruled in present-day Sichuan province, and the Wu Kingdom, 222 to 280 CE, ruled south of the Yangtze River. Remember her? In about circa 263, the Wei conquered the Shu Han, turning this into a 2 kingdoms period. Do you get it? But then 2 years after, a Wei general named Sima Yan, posthumously Wu Di, but not that other Wu Di, usurped the throne and proclaimed the Jin dynasty. Though this period is quite short, it is quite complicated and messy. And like with most things complicated and messy, people have taken to this era in a big way, romanticizing it and recording it for posterity in great pieces of fiction such as the Sanguo Yanyi, or Romance of the Three Kingdoms, a piece written in the 14th century that is one of the most famous examples of Chinese historical novels / novels in general in China. In 280, the Jin conquered the Wu, ending the Three Kingdoms period and fully ushering in the Jin, 265 to 420 CE. Blaze it. You will likely often see this dynasty separated into 2 smaller periods. The Xi Jin, or Western Jin, from 265 to circa 316 CE, and the Dong Jin, Eastern Jin, from 317 to 420 CE. Though Wu Di, not that Wu Di, appeared to be a deft and able ruler, as is a common trend, his successors were not, plunging the empire into strife and unrest. Once again in a common trend, Smaller areas within the territory were claimed and run by rulers who functioned more or less autonomously. Regicides and abdications were common, and the decay of the Xijin followed the same pattern of decline as the previous dynasties, this time featuring northern nomadic groups, the Xiongnu. They took advantage of the instability, attacked, and in 311 CE sacked the capital at Luoyang and killed the emperor. The Jin moved their capital to Chang'an, now Xi'an, which was, you guessed it, attacked and sacked in 316. The emperor at the time, a grandson of Udi, not that Udi, surrendered to the chief, abdicated, and was put to death. A prince established a court at Jiankang, now Nanjing, in 317 and founded the Dongjin. To make a long story short here, they successfully resisted attacks from the north and even reconquered some territory in 347. But the general responsible for this victory deposed the emperor and installed a puppet ruler on the throne. However, shortly thereafter, they both died. Whoops. A bit later in 383, the Dongjin successfully defeated northern nomadic invaders at the Battle of Fei River, or the Battle of Feishui, but they kept coming. In 400 CE, disaffected farmers and landowners revolted, but this uprising was crushed in 402, resulting in more power being given to the military leaders. They followed up and pushed northwestward around 415 to 417 CE. However, shortly thereafter, a couple of usurpations occurred, resulting in Liu Yu taking the throne. He actually usurped somebody, installed a puppet, and then had that puppet killed and took the throne himself. What? Anyway, this formally, I'll explain that in a bit, launched an incredibly complicated period that I will do my best to explain and break down clearly and logically without leaving anything important out. Sorry in advance because I'm not sure that's really possible. The period of the Southern and Northern Dynasties, 386 to 589 CE. Okay, let's get one thing straight here really quickly. There are two separate but related periods here. The Southern Dynasties, 420 to 589, and the Northern Dynasties, 386 to 581. I, as many others, have chosen to list the period for the Southern and Northern Dynasties as 386 to 589 to encompass both periods. Let's start with the Southern Dynasties, 420 to 589. Liu Yu, the dude who killed his own puppet in an act that could only be described as geppetto-cide, founded the Liu-Song dynasty in 420. The Southern Dynasties are as follows. Liu-Song dynasty, 420 to 479, Southern Qi, 479 to 502, Liang, 502 to 587, and Chen, 557 to 589. All four southern dynasties had their capital at Jiankang, present-day Nanjing in Jiangsu province. Let's shift gears and look at the northern dynasties, 386 to 581. In 386, the Wei dynasty, not the Wei kingdom, though the Wei kingdom can also be called the Wei, was founded by the Tabgach tribesmen, or Tuoba, northern nomads of uncertain origin, and by 439, they had secured and unified all territories in northern China. This was all occurring during a period known as the 16 Kingdoms from 304 to 439, when regions north of the Yangtze suffered an internal rebellion that divided the kingdom into, you guessed it, 16 smaller ones. We're not going to really worry about these because this video is going to be like an hour long as it is, or maybe it just feels that way for me, but just know that northern China was separate from southern China and broke apart. Then in 386, the founding of the Wei dynasty began the period of northern dynasties, and eventually everyone was happily, or maybe begrudgingly, I wasn't there, reunited in 439. The northern dynasties consisted of the North Wei, yes Wei, 386 to 557, East Wei, 534 to 550, West Wei, 535 to 556, North Qi, 550 to 577, and North Zhou, 577 to 581. All northern dynasties were established by the Xianbei people except for the North Qi, but we don't care about them. Okay, so as you can see, we had a fragmented bipartite China for hundreds of years, and the two parts were far from stable, both consisting of a series of dynasties relatively rapidly replacing one another. What is happening in our story? Will China ever reunite? Yeah, I mean, duh, it's still around today, and if we have like half the video left, am I ever gonna get some sleep? Sui, 581 to 618 CE. God, it feels good to have a normal title card again. The Sui dynasty was short-lived but very significant because it reunited the country after centuries of fragmentation. The first Sui emperor, Yang Jian, better known by his posthumous name Wendi, was a high-ranking official of the North Zhou dynasty who seized the throne during a period of plots, murders, and chaos. Never seen that before. He took firm control of North China and won control all the rest of it back as well. He installed the capital at present-day Xi'an. The Sui, much like the Han, re-established Confucian ideas and rituals that had not been in place since the Han. Buddhism grew at this time, much as it had been growing in the background through the past couple of periods. Perhaps most importantly, the Sui began an artistic and cultural renaissance that would peak in the following dynasty, one of the most important in all of Chinese history, but we're not there quite yet. One of the most important facets of this was the introduction of a new category of examinations for the presented scholar, 进士科. These were the origins of the imperial examination system that would last all the way until 1905. It's difficult to say when the imperial examination system truly began, with people placing its origin plus or minus 4 different dynasties, but it is valid to say that this can be considered the beginning. The significance of the imperial examination system is honestly incredibly large. You see, commoners who were not of noble birth or rank, with no ties to powerful families and the like, could improve theirs as well as their family's lot in life through the examinations. Commoners could rise up through the ranks of being government officials with almost no ceiling, so long as they were incredibly studious and successful in their exams. Though these examinations did not significantly shift the practice of selecting and recruiting during the Sui dynasty, the imperial examination system continued to evolve from this point onward and would continue to greatly influence Chinese society, social structure, and culture for the next 1300 years. So I said the Sui was short-lived. Well, what happened to it? A man named Yuan, or Gaozu, not that Gaozu, was a military leader and contender for rule of the Sui dynasty, but he instead proclaimed himself emperor in 618 after suppressing a coup, marking the beginning of the Tang, 618 to 907 CE. The hundreds of years of division and fragmentation which followed the collapse of the Han dynasty in 220 CE was ended with the reunification of China under the short-lived Sui. Yes, but it was under the Tang that China once again truly flourished and began to grow fully into its own in almost every aspect. Building upon the political and governmental institutions established during the Sui, the Tang was, in the words of the Met, marked by strong and benevolent rule, successful diplomatic relationships, economic expansion, and a cultural efflorescence of cosmopolitan style. I couldn't have said it better myself. Literally. The son and successor of Gaozu, not that Gaozu, Emperor Taizong from 626 to 649, was a prolific leader. It was under him that the Tang dynasty really flourished and came into its own. Sure, he came into power by murdering not 1, but 2 brothers and forcing the abdication of his own father, but he would go on to become one of the greatest emperors, and some even argue the greatest, in all of Chinese history. I mean, to put that achievement in context, just look at the length of this video. Dang. Though that is certainly not a great way to achieve power, I suppose it was an early display of his unbounded ambition. Note: Jungle Jim does not condone the acts of fratricide and paternal abdication. He consolidated and balanced power on the home front, expanded the Sui systems of examinations for hiring civil servants, pushing the imperial examination system forward, and defeated and subdued neighbors in the north and west, securing peace and expanding China farther westward than ever before. What a guy. Ooh, women in history alert. Yay! Wu Zhao, posthumously Wu Hou, from 624 to 705, became empress during the reign of Emperor Gaozong from 649 to 683. When her husband became ill, she pushed her power forward more and maintained a steady grip on the government until she was forced to abdicate in her 80s. Dang. Following her abdication, those in power who were scattered, incarcerated, and murdered under Empress Wu Hou, I never said she was perfect, were restored in the aristocracy and an era of reform began. Emperor Xuanzong, ruled from 712 to 756, came to power at this time, a ruler who has often been referred to as Ming Huang, or the Brilliant Monarch. The 8th century, largely under his rule, is heralded as the classical period of Chinese art and literature, a period so prolific that it set the standard to which later poets, periods, and sculptors all aspired. Perhaps you've heard of the poets Li Bai, 701 to 762, and Du Fu, 712 to 770? Yeah? No? Well, for some reason I have, though I suppose this makes sense given that they are 2 of the most famous poets of Chinese history, and the fact that they are contemporaries is incredible. Many of their works reflected the ostentatious court lives as well as the conflicting sentiments resulting from military campaigns. Another one of the many notable figures was Wang Wei, 699 to 759, a poet and painter known for his naturalist idioms, many of whose works served as an artistic paradigm for subsequent generations. However, in the second half of this golden century, rebellion broke out in the northeast and spread rapidly, forcing Emperor Xuanzong to flee west to Sichuan. Though this was eventually suppressed, following this came more rebellion. And though Emperor Xianzong, not to be confused with Xuanzong, confused, though he almost entirely restored the empire, in the latter part of the 9th century, the government's power declined, rebellions arose once more, and the dynasty declined until one man seized power and the empire collapsed into independent kingdoms, leading us into the Five Dynasties. 907 to 960 CE. What, you thought we were done with confusing periods with many back-to-back dynasties and multiple smaller kingdoms? No, we're going to focus on the succession of dynasties here, but just be aware that this era is also sometimes known as the period of the 10 kingdoms, because southern China was broken up and ruled by 10 different regimes at the same time. But back to the dynasties. The rebel leader Yuan, the guy who usurped the throne, founded the Ho Liang dynasty in 907, Ho meaning later, so as to not confuse it with the Liang dynasty of the southern dynasties period. But then he was murdered by his own son in 912, and a general seized power amidst this and founded the Ho Tang dynasty in 923. They ruled for 13 years before another general overthrew the government by working with the semi-nomadic Khitan people, establishing the Ho Jin dynasty in 936. That general's son tried to stop paying tribute to the Khitan in 946, so they invaded, kidnapped him, and left, ending the 10-year dynasty. In 947, another general founded the Ho Han dynasty and pushed the Khitan back. But just 4 short years later, in 951, another general usurped the throne and founded the Ho Zhou dynasty. They tried to create a more stable government, and though this goal was never realized, the first complete printing of the Confucian classics happened during this time in 953. But anyway, that didn't really matter, and then that emperor died in 960 and left a mere infant as emperor. Seizing upon this, another general known as Taizu stole the throne from the baby because he wanted to play with it, and the baby didn't seem to be using it anyway, founding the Song, 960 to 1279 CE. Holy wow! A dynasty lasting more than 15 years? Insanity. However, it is common and perhaps a bit more logical to divide this dynasty into 2 periods, so let's begin with the Northern Song, 960 to 1127 CE. The Song was a time of great social and economic change, and this period in many ways shaped the intellectual and political climate of China all the way until the 20th century. During this era of the Song, the capital was located at Bianliang, modern Kaifeng. Taizu consolidated power with savvy diplomatic maneuvering and set the empire on a course of sound, stable administration and ruled by following Confucian principles and instituting pragmatic civil service. Before his death, he had begun expanding into the aforementioned 10 kingdoms in southern China, looking to bring them back into the fold. Before we move out of the Northern Song, I want to talk about something because I think it's really cool. Landscape painting. China is, of course, famous for this, but it was at this time that large-scale landscape painting really flourished and began to take on a very unique and poignant style. You see, with the imperial examination system in full swing at this point, the development of the new class of scholar officials was rapidly occurring, and these private and learned men saw great beauty and meaning in nature. Visions of the natural hierarchy presented in the untouched world became poignant sources of metaphors for the well-regulated state. Scholar officials asserted their identity as literati through poetry, calligraphy, and a new style of painting that utilized calligraphic brushstrokes and methods to aid in self-expression and the conveyance of meaning. Countless landscape paintings of/from the retreats of these literati became deeply associated with and representative of their character and spirit. Anyway, Taizu's successors maintained a fragile and tense peace with the menacing Liao kingdom of the Khitan people to the north. Remember them? Apparently, it wasn't the Liao kingdom they should have been worried about, because the Jurchen tribes in the north overthrew the Liao and invaded the northern Song, taking it over and establishing the Jin dynasty, not that Jin dynasty, 1115 to 1234, causing the northern Song to move south and becoming the Southern Song, 1127 to 1279 CE. Emperor Gaozong, not that Gaozong, established his empire in the south at Linnan, present-day Hangzhou, focusing immediately on creating and maintaining defenses from the hostile northerners of the Jin dynasty. Gaozong admired and emulated the Han dynasty's approach to managing civil service, and the bureaucracy functioned quite well during his time. Actually, the Southern Song and Song dynasty overall was tracking well and doing very well for itself. In fact, it is one of the only dynasties to end neither suddenly nor as a result of internal collapse, patricide, assassination, or abdication. Oh, I got bingo. No, instead Genghis Khan, now I know you've heard of this guy, and the Mongols began their invasion of China by first attacking the Jin dynasty in the north in 1211. In 1234, the Jin fell, and the Song coexisted with the Mongols uneasily until 1250, when Genghis Khan's grandsons got bored and attacked the southern Song. Unlike what happened with many previous invasions in Chinese history, particularly from northern nomads, the Song actually managed to fight and hold out until 1276, when their capital fell to the Mongols. The dynasty came to an official end in 1279 when the Song fleet was destroyed near Guangzhou. Kublai Khan, one of Genghis Khan's grandsons, completed the consolidation of the empire, ushering in a unique and fascinating time in Chinese history, the Yuan. 1279 to 1368 CE. Yuan dynasty was the first non-Chinese ruled dynasty in all of Chinese history to rule all of China. In fact, they ruled more than present-day China. Damn. Since they had no experience running such a large and complex empire, the Mongols turned to Chinese cultural traditions and bureaucratic models to guide their governance. Funnily enough, and somewhat ironically, the Yuan was the first dynasty to make present-day Beijing its capital, because Beijing is obviously the capital today. Though the Yuan was responsible for certain achievements such as further improving and developing roads, canals, and postal stations, as well as the most extensive trade and foreign interaction resulting from the massive empire, the Mongols still held themselves as separate from the Chinese, and this led to their downfall. They intentionally maintained their separation from the Chinese, choosing to instill people such as Marco Polo, y'all, you gotta say Polo, in government instead of members of the native population. They treated their relation to the Chinese people as that of ruling superior class and subjugated inferior peoples, leading to revolts and an overthrow of the Yuan in 1368, restoring Chinese rule and beginning the Ming. 1368 to 1644 CE. Ooh, baby, we're getting close. I can almost taste it. The Mongol emperor fled back to Inner Mongolia when the Ming troops, led by Zhou Yuanzhong, 1328 to 1398, who came to be known as Hongwu, invaded the Yuan capital. The rest of the country was slowly but easily retaken, and reunification was completed in 1382. The Ming was one of the most stable of all dynasties, but this is largely resulting from its heavily autocratic qualities, though the origins of this can be easily understood as Hongwu feared the Mongols retaking their lost empire. In order to prevent this, the government needed to be centrally strong. The civil service system, try saying that 3 times fast, civil service system, I'm probably tired, through the imperial examination system, was perfected during this dynasty, resulting in almost all top Ming officials having entered the bureaucracy through this channel. And in the same vein as the Song, the Ming relied heavily on the literati in managing state affairs. Throughout the Ming dynasty, there was unprecedented economic and cultural expansion as well as a near doubling of the population. Most people followed the 3 teachings of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. The Great Wall was refurbished and completed, bringing it to its full glory. Large naval expeditions took place alongside the growth of vibrant maritime trade. Seems too good to be true, huh? Well, of course it is, silly. Alongside all of this was struggles with peoples of various groups, including still the Mongols. The last century of the Ming was marked and greatly affected by issues at the borders, crop failure, fiscal instability, and court corruption. Eventually, in 1644, a rebel leader named Li Zicheng captured Beijing. A Ming general named Wu Sangui created an alliance with the Manchu tribal peoples of northern China who had been encroaching on the northern borders as a result of Li Zicheng moving against him. The Manchus and Wu Sangui entered and retook the capital, but then the Manchus just kind of stayed and established the Qing. 1644 to 1912 CE. Here we are, the last imperial dynasty. I can feel it. The Qing dynasty once again returned rule over China to foreign hands. Perhaps learning from the mistakes made by the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty, the Qing established their legitimacy and right to rule by embracing and following Confucian-style practices. They adopted the Ming form of government and continued to employ Ming officials. All of this served to pacify the Chinese population and prevent rebellion. However, they still wanted to guarantee Manchu control over the empire, so they ensured that half of the high-level officials were Manchus. Under the Qing, the territory of the Chinese empire expanded greatly, basically looking like the territory today. And the population tripled from about 150 million to 450 million. Many of the non-Chinese minorities throughout the vast empire were truly brought into the fold of China and made Chinese in character and form. If this is a good thing or not, it's kind of up for debate. It's a whole thing. The reigns of Kangxi ruled from 1662 to 1722, Yongzheng ruled from 1722 to 1735, and Qianlong ruled from 1736 to 1795 are often jointly viewed as the greatest reigns in Chinese history. These incredible rulers presided over a period where the Manchus emphatically embraced Chinese cultural traditions, and the imperial court became a great patron of the arts. Concurrently, China was enjoying an extended period of political stability and economic prosperity. Commerce thrived, handicraft industries prospered, and religious diversity was more greatly tolerated. In fact, Roman Catholic missionaries were even employed as astronomers and artists. However, what goes up must come down. The push and pull of the yin and yang, if you will. Subsequent rulers faced great difficulties in confronting the problems caused by increased population and overall land size / issues of demarcation and ownership. Efforts towards modernization and westernization faced great opposition from more conservative officials. In fact, overall dealings with and relations to foreign nations was a major shortcoming in the late Qing dynasty. The First Opium War, 1839 to 1842, the Second Opium War, 1856 to 1860, the Sino-Japanese War, 1894 to 1895, and Boxer Rebellion, 1900, were all major defeats for China that resulted in the granting of large concessions to foreign powers. By 1900, many revolutionary groups had begun to form throughout the country, and on October 10th, 1911, you know stuff's getting real when we have specific dates, the Chinese Revolution or Xinhai Revolution occurred, resulting in the abdication of the boy emperor Shentong, or Puyi. Authority was transferred to a provisional republican government, resulting in the end of Chinese imperial rule and the end of the dynasties once and for all. So, to recap, we have the Mythical Period / Xia, Shang, Zhou, Qin, Han, Three Kingdoms period, Jin, period of the southern and northern dynasties, Sui, Tang, the Five Dynasties, Song, Yuan, Ming, Qing. But what happened next, I hear you say? Well, that's a story for next time. I don't want to try and cram such a fascinating, convoluted, and important history into the back half of this already incredibly long video, so I would much rather give 1911 to present day its own video to be able to really break it down and get into the details. Until then, I bid you adieu. I genuinely tried my absolute hardest on this video, and I really hope it shows. Thank you very much for watching.